Another Wednesday's come and gone, and I've got some comics. Let's talk about them. Hey, welcome to 9 Panel Grid. This week, we've seen Dust Bowl Dilemmas, Silver Age Shenanigans, and Radioactive Revolt. But we're going to kick things off this week with Action Comics 1081, written by Mark Waid with artwork by Clayton Henry. So, in a vacuum, I feel like the adventures of the weekly version of Action Comics was okay. It was a lot of fun. It felt classic and it didn't feel weighty or anything that was really in need of continuity besides like a very basic understanding of Superman and the Superman mythos. In comparison to other books, though, such as the Superman proper title by Joshua Williamson, this just doesn't feel like it holds up a candle. I do feel like Clayton Henry coming back to finish up the series or this, little mini run on Action Comics actually did wonders, as his artwork definitely kept things very consistent, very clean, and very classic feeling as well. So it really kind of leaned into what Mark Waid was doing with a classic feeling type of story. Overall, the resolution behind everything with the Phantom Zone and the things that they had to do to get the Kryptonians back into their, I guess, internment, their prisonhood of the Phantom Zone itself, felt very hand wavy. It felt like a very easy resolution that wasn't necessarily explained within the pages of the book. It felt like it was very rushed in that way, which kind of was, I don't know, a little bit unsatisfactory, but overall, again, with this feeling like a classic, toned story, I think it kind of worked out. So overall, kind of middle of the road for Action Comics here, but not overall bad either. Next up, let's talk Amazing Spider-Man number 64, written by Justina Ireland with artwork by Gleb Melnikoff. Kind of similar to Action Comics, we're kind of dealing with the it was okay realm. This issue was totally unoffensive. Nothing terrible happens in it. It continues our adventures of Peter Parker being the protector, the champion of Earth in his kind of protection from the minions of Sidorak. And this is another issue where another set of minions comes to play. Where the last issue felt like it had kind of a Bill and Ted-esque resolution to it, this one feels like it's aping off of Ghostbusters, though, as the minion of Sidorak has these little Sidorak dogs that can possess people, very much like the Zool minions, the Keymaster and the Gatekeeper. Overall, again, this was kind of just an okay issue. There's nothing offensive about it. It was just kind of a fun, silly comic book, right? And that's not bad necessarily, but it's not anything I'm going to return to over and over again to read. Gleb's artwork, I really praised it in the previous issue as well, and it is still very good in this issue, albeit it felt much more rushed. So where those influences that I spoke of previously were inherent, it felt like it was something that was off kilter. It was something that was just, I don't know, didn't feel right about it overall. So all in all, I feel like that's kind of like a culmination of the issue. It was all right, but something felt off. All right, let's talk Black Canary, Best of the Best, number 2. Written by Tom King with artwork by Ryan Sook. So Ryan Sook is something I was kind of critical of his artwork in issue number 1, as there were some people in there that felt a little plasticky, didn't feel real. I have to say, his artwork in issue number 2 is much improved. I feel like everything felt natural, everything felt really nice. The characters that he was working with all looked authentic and clean and really just kind of great. So good job, Ryan. I think it was a really big improvement here. Unfortunately, I feel like Tom King, some of the critiques that people have, myself included of Tom King, is that he gets very verbose and very wordy. And in some stories, that works out extraordinarily well, and it works for the betterment of the story. I can't say that it does that in this because I don't know what the story is trying to tell besides what could be a very simplistic story. It is the character of Black Canary, kind of the premise is that she's going to take a dive in a fight for a very particular reason. However, we don't need the commentary of the fight to be the framing device because it gets so incredibly overwrought. There are so many words in this book that just don't need to be there. If you have something to say it. That's fine. But don't keep saying the same thing 100 times within the pages of one single issue, because we get the point. Do something that's going to forward the story. Like, bring it forward. Like, let's see what's going to happen here. If there's something new and exciting that we're not seeing behind the scenes, that's great. Tell that story, though. Overall, again, I think the artwork lifted it up in the way that the writing let it down. So this is kind of on par with issue number 1, just for all the different reasons that I had to say about the other issue. And with our next book, we have Detective Comics 1092, written by Tom Taylor, with artwork by Mikel Janín. So I'm going to start with Mikel Janin's artwork again, because I feel like I'm kind of like surprised with each and every issue that they've been able to produce. This is my first outing with them as an artist, and I gotta say, I'm extraordinarily impressed. They're putting forth some really fantastic work here, and knowing that it is them doing the penciling and the inking and the coloring on this makes it even more impressive, as the color palette on this book, especially in the nighttime scenes where everything is kind of drenched in neon colors, or very I don't know, pale. There's a pale color tone, but also very colorful in the same vein, if that makes any sense here. It's almost like everything is being reflected off of a different surface before it hits the characters, and I really love that about it. It kind of I don't know, just kind of seeps us in like a seedy underbelly kind of a Gotham type city. Really great stuff here. Speaking of really great, Tom Taylor is crafting a story here that feels very of its time with a Batman story. I was just on Pop Culture Philosophers talking about our best books of the month here, and a couple of them that came up were Batman stories that were kind of set early on in Batman's career, kind of year 3 era. Well, this doesn't feel like that, but it doesn't feel like that in the best way possible. It feels like a modern Bruce story, pulling on modern Bruce things here. Damian is definitely very much a part of this story, but it's not bogged down by continuity either. It's telling a story that is right here and right now, but doesn't feel the need to draw on so many things that it becomes something that is, I don't know, more of a homework chore kind of thing than just enjoying reading a comic book. Tom Taylor's kind of walking that razor thin line, and I think he's doing a really great job of it. Now, part of the premise of this book here involves a person from Bruce's past, and I'm very curious because we don't quite know yet, but there's only going to be one or two directions we can go, which is going to be the very predictable route of who we find our villain to be, and the rug being pulled out from underneath us because the expectation is not what is actually going to be delivered here. I'm curious to see what route Tom goes with this, because it's really going to weigh heavily on the satisfaction of the overall story. But as an issue, this was absolutely fantastic. Next up, we have Dust to Dust number 1, written by Phil Bram and J.G. Jones, with artwork by J.G. Jones. So this is the introductory issue of our Dust Bowl era story, the Depression-like set era comic book that really revolves around two of our main characters, one being a sheriff and one being a journalist. And this really does more of setting the stage for where we're at and the time frame that we're kind of telling our story in, more so than telling us what the story is about. So we understand the sheriff character and this town, which is really very much struggling. People are leaving for California to find better jobs. Again, it's in the Dust Bowl, so not only have the jobs dried up, but the land itself has very truly dried up. But what we're delivered is that the sheriff is finding things out about the town, and maybe the employer who kind of was supposed to be taking care of most of the people within the town. And there's a mystery to be unfolding here. We don't get delivered a lot of that mystery, though, as, again, this was very introductory, and we kind of don't know really what the premise of this book is quite yet, but there's more to be delivered as the story unfolds. What I can tell you is that because of the time era and because of the setting that we have in this book, J.G. Jones's artwork is absolutely stunning, as everything is very painterly and everything is very just drenched in sepia tone. It looks like you're looking at a painting of a classic picture, of a picture that was taken within the time frame and within that era of the book that we're reading. It's really stunning. If you buy this only for the artwork, you're in for a treat. The story, again, very light on detail here, but as it unfolds, it has potential to be something that could be really good. Time will tell on that. But I can tell you that Dust to Dust did not disappoint me. Next up, we have Geiger number 9, written by Jeff Johns with artwork by Paul Pelletier. This was a very classic feeling story, and I think that has a lot to do with the artwork on here, as Paul kind of is taking over for a mini arc here from Gary Frank, and he brings a very classic feel to this story. And by no means is that a bad thing. I think that, like, part of the charm and part of the best parts of Ghost Machine as an entire line, but very specifically for Geiger itself too, is it's a story about that has a lot of heart, has a lot of charm to it, and it feels like a story that could be a classic comic book told in a modern day time. So his artwork leans heavily into that. When I talk about the writing, it's the same kind of notion too. It's a hero's journey, but not just for our hero, but even for the ancillary characters all around. I feel like the landscape that they're in, the apocalyptic future that we are delivered here, really makes people make hard choices and hard changes in their lives. And we see that from our Ward character, kind of like, the person that Tariq has taken in and kind of, I don't know, made him a new person altogether here just through a lot of different actions. It's definitely not from his teaching necessarily, but just as being able to kind of absorb what Tariq has done for different people at different times throughout his life. I love how there is a big shift at the very end of this issue as we really see that Ward take on like I don't know, a new identity basically for himself as he takes on a very heroic act. And we've seen this kind of build issue through issue. This was kind of, I feel like, the culmination of that. Speaking of the end of the issue, too, there is an epilogue that is extraordinarily exciting as it kind of like builds out what the unnamed universe is going to be here and what it's going to mean for the crossovers of characters like Junkyard Joe, Redcoat, Geiger, and even more coming down the pipeline. Really fantastic stuff here. I like that Gary Frank came back and drew those couple pages of the epilogue as well to really draw it all back into what the original creative team was. Geiger is awesome. Like, it's just a really fun book. There's not been a single issue that has kind of like let its foot off the gas pedal. This continues that trend. All right, next up we have Green Arrow number 19, written by Chris Condon with artwork by Montos. This is a great continuation off of Chris Condon's very first outing for the Green Arrow book itself. And I love that we're kind of dealing with a more street level version of the character who still has his family and still has connections to the Justice League, but we're telling a Green Arrow story. We're telling an Ollie story set in Star City. It's really great. I like that, again, we're dealing with the street level version of this character, which means that he's paired with a character that is on the police force itself. And the back and forth, kind of, I don't know, playful banter that they have with each other is really nice. I really like seeing how that works out. And I think a writer like Chris Condon is able to write that dialogue and that narrative in a very fluid, natural way. Being that there is a lot of talking head scenes, I think that Montos as an artist is doing a lot of visual storytelling tricks here that are making that really interesting and really unique. There's things that he's doing playing with, especially in like a scene where the detective is driving the car and Green Arrow is in the back of the car. There's framing that he does on these scenes that make it very interesting. It's not just panel one is a face, panel two is the other person's face, dialogue bubble here. No, he's making it interesting and he's making it something where you feel like you are a passenger in the scene or you're sitting in on it and kind of watching it. I really like what they're doing with that visual storytelling aspect of it. Really makes the artwork pop, really makes the story flow in a really nice way. Overall, it's unfolding. We're getting new parts of the mystery that are unfolding in regard to kind of the poisoning that's happening to the water, the freshwater killer, if you will. And we're being delivered some really cool things here. I think that this issue both starts and ends in a better way than the previous issue started and ended. This tells a more complete story for the single issue and sets us up for even more fantastic things to come down the pipeline. Next up, we have Iron Man number 3, written by Spencer Ackerman with artwork by Jethro Morales. So if you're buying this book, you're very clearly buying this book with the premise of Iron Man has a big sword. And that's okay. It's nonsensical and it's silly and it's fun in the ways that a comic book definitely could and should be. You need a healthy amount of suspension of disbelief for this book, though, as there are things that happen within here that just, quite frankly, it wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense in a real world setting. It really kind of makes you even scratch your head a little bit in the world of the Marvel Universe, but it is what it is. Tony's business is about to be dissolved. He's not going to have a place on the board anymore. It's not going to be his company. So there's things that happen here which kind of, I don't know. It's a hand wavy solution that comes into play. But what I do like is that we're leaning into a more knightly version of Tony, right? As the Iron Man suit feels very steampunkish. He has a big sword now. It's only right that they're drawing in magical aspects of this as well. And it really feels like he's going to be setting up a story that is going to be technology versus magic. That's a cool notion. We play with that a little bit over the history of Iron Man's storyline, but it's something that's not played with enough, I feel like. So if they lean in that direction, this could be something that sets up some things that are pretty cool. Overall, within the first 3 issues, though, it's been very middle of the road. Next up, we have Justice League Unlimited number 2, written by Mark Waid with artwork by Dan Mora. So this issue does a lot to tell the B story, basically, of issue number 1, where we had the Justice League and the certain members of the Justice League kind of like taking on the problem of the day and like solving their mission and taking care of everything that needed to be taken care of. While on the side, you had Batman and Blue Beetle investigating these eggs that were in a forest. Those eggs happened to be hatching parademons coming from Apocalypse. So this issue really starts telling the story of what was happening there and what happens after the fact. I like that they're taking their time to like spend time with each individual character here, as this spent a lot of time with Martian Manhunter. And we really take time to also talk about the ramifications of absolute power here, as there's been a little bit of a switcheroo thing that's been happening with powers. Some people got their powers back after they were taken away. Some of them not so much, and some of them were given to other people, similar to like what we learned about from the Superwoman special here with Lois Lane. It's kind of unfolding the story in a really nice way. They're giving you just enough to kind of bring you back, but they're not telling you all of the mystery all at once here. The one thing I will say, though, is that there's 2 books that came out from Dan Mora this week, and one of them felt really spectacular, and one of them felt just okay for Dan Mora standards, which is obviously much higher than others. And this is the one that felt just okay to me, and I feel like it's the coloring that's kind of letting it down a little bit. Again, I have the problem of having to compare the 2 against one another, and if you're asking me, I think that Superman looked much better than Justice League Unlimited. One of them had much more of a flat color palette, I should say, and it felt very classic comic booky, where the other one felt much more, I don't know, lively. Something popped with it, but we'll talk more about that later. What I can tell you is that the artwork is still very, very good. It's, again, just looking at them back and forth, one was better than the other. Overall, Justice League has been really exciting. I like what they're delivering with each and every issue, as there's still a lot of kind of plot points that they're dealing with, and they're giving you just enough with each and every issue. All right, let's talk Metamorpho, the Element Man, number 1, written by Al Ewing with artwork by Steve Lieber. This feels like a book that's right up Al Ewing's lane, as I've been able to say this about a lot of his books. This is super niche. Either you're going to love this, or it is totally not going to be for you. This feels like it's coming from a writer who appreciates the lineage of comic books and where certain characters came from, and kind of the eras maybe that they worked best in. This feels seeped in Silver Age comic books. This feels like it's telling a story from the Silver Age comic books. It's not afraid to be a little bit hokey and a little bit cheesy, but it's done so with a lot of heart and a lot of charm. If you like that kind of thing and you kind of dig on Silver Age comic books, I think you're going to really like this. If that is not up your alley, if you're looking for very just modern comics, you might want to steer clear of this, because I don't think it's going to be for you. Steve Lieber's artwork continues to be fantastic. This is the same artist that was working on books like Jimmy Olsen, that was written by Matt Fraction. Really great stuff, really exciting storytelling here. really a lot of charm. The same kind of charm that Al Ewing brings from the Silver Age tone, he brings on the artistic side as well. It's a fun romp. It's very, again, seeped of that time. It feels very 70s when it comes to what is being told in the storyline here. And that's okay. But again, it's going to be either your flavor or absolutely not. All right, let's talk Superman number 21, written by Joshua Williamson with artwork by Dan Mora. This was such a fun in-betweener issue as we're dealt with a lot of heavy things that are going on with the Timekeeper and Doomsday and everything that's going on with that as they had to do battle and they know that horrible things are coming down the pipeline. This issue is all spent between Clark and Lois as they really kind of try to formulate a date day between one another as they kind of just try to take their minds off of all the heaviness of everything that's been going on with Absolute Power, with Doomsday's return, everything that's going on within the DC universe. They just needed a break and a rest and a time to, kind of recollect and like look back at what it means to be these superpowered people, but also be Clark and Lois. They do a really fantastic job of setting this up here. And what I really love is that this issue also takes time to have little interludes with other people here. We get to see Jimmy Olsen and, and the Silver Banshee. We get to see, Lex Luthor. We get to see a lot of different things, just real quick interludes. And it's such a nice, refreshing issue. It did that in-betweener issue thing so freaking well that it really made me think like, man, like more comics should do it this good and they should do it maybe a little bit more often. I spoke about Dan Mora's artwork on the Justice League Unlimited, and I gotta say, it's up to the same standard on Superman. I think that they deliver really fantastic things here, but it's really the color that makes it pop so hard on this book here. In the modern day sense of things, the here and now, what's happening in the book, everything is bright and bold, but you also see the reflective light off of other things. It's not flat by any means. Everything is really colorful and really vibrant, but there's also times where they're talking and recollecting on things that have happened in the past, such as the introduction of Doomsday and that fight that brought on the death of Superman. And things are colored really in a fantastic way where they bring in like a halftone kind of aspect to it and makes it feel like a classic comic book. So it does two things. It kind of, makes us think back at the comics of that time, but also it kind of does something where, I don't know, it's honoring those comics of the time too. So it's like helping you understand this took place in the past, but honors the past in the same time. It's really great. It's a really fun issue. And I don't know, it's a difficult line to toe when you're doing something that's really fun, but also resonates really hard. Joshua Williamson does that within the pages of this book really fantastically. With our next issue, we have Ultimate Black Panther number 11, written by Brian Edward Hill with artwork by Carlos Nito. This is a slow burn book. This is a slow burn issue. If that's going to be something that you can kind of like dig and like kind of like go with the flow on it, you're going to find a lot of satisfaction from this. If you're someone that needs big action set pieces every single issue or maybe every single couple pages, this book might not work for you. The storyline all revolves in this issue around basically a possible treaty between Moon Knight and T'Challa, as Moon Knight basically comes to them and says, hey, we'll call off this war. We'll pull out of all of our war against Wakanda. You have to agree to give us part of Africa, though. And that doesn't sit well with T'Challa. And we're trying to understand if this doesn't sit well with T'Challa because of his duties as a king, or his duties as Black Panther, or if it's the influence of the vibranium over him that's making him, act in ways that he wouldn't normally act. There's a lot of nuance that comes along with this book as we're kind of trying to figure out what the vibranium means for this character and how it's really truly been influencing him since he's taking over the mantle of Black Panther. It's something that's worthwhile. I feel like, again, the slow burn is something that's earned, and it's not something that is just a drag of a read. If you're in this and you've been in it since issue number 1, I think it's worthwhile, and I think it's fulfilling to see the journey of this character and all the ancillary characters as well, because they all play a part in this. But overall, again, in a vacuum, if this was your first issue of Black Panther, I don't know if this would be the one that kept you hanging around. Next up, we have X-Men number 9, written by Jed MacKay with artwork by Federico Vincentini. So the last issue, I jumped back in because there was a crossover event that was happening with Uncanny X-Men, and I said, maybe this is what's going to draw me back into X-Men. Maybe this is what's going to do it. No, I was tricked. I was wrong. I was fooled. This book didn't make any sense to me whatsoever, to a frustrating level. The bickering and banter between Rogue and Scott as they're working towards what they're going to do to free the people that are kind of imprisoned at Greymalkin right now makes absolutely no sense. And I get that Scott has beef with Xavier, but who doesn't have beef with Xavier at this point? At the end of the day, just none of it made sense to me whatsoever. The story totally took me out of it, and it felt very out of character. Everything just felt so forced, like we just needed to get these people to fight to sell a comic book. And sometimes, sure, that's fine, but there's too much history involved with these characters to let something like that happen without a big meaning, a big purpose. They didn't have any of that. On top of that, I did enjoy when Federico Vincentini was drawing this. He was the artist that primarily was working on Miles Morales' Spider-Man and doing really great work over there. I think that his portion of the book here really stands out and really looks nice. But then it's handed over to Ryan Stegman in the latter pages of this issue, and the artwork change was extraordinarily jarring, and it was some of the worst artwork I've seen probably from Ryan Stegman in a really long time. Very rushed looking, very choppy, very just not great. And it hurts to say that because Ryan Stegman can do some really fantastic artwork. This wasn't it, though. Overall, this drew me right back out. It's back being pulled from the pull list. I'm not doing that anymore here. So fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice. Yeah, you know the saying. So there you go. And with our runner-up pick of the week, we have Redcoat number 8. Written by Jeff Johns with artwork by Brian Hitch. This was a great standalone issue where we're delivered Simon Pure basically just trying to seek refuge in a house. It was a story that was kind of untold and on his last outing with Albert Einstein. It was the story that he didn't want to tell because there was something behind it that was so painful that just he didn't want to bring it back up. And we start to see why that was. Simon Pure is looking for a place to stay overnight, and he comes across a family who is very clearly intent on doing nothing more than murdering every person that comes by their way. And they're doing so in a very malicious way where they're drawing them in, they're giving them a place, and very intently going to slaughter them at the first moment opportunity. Simon obviously can't have that happen. He's an immortal, and he's able to stop what they're doing here. But it's showing the shift in his character as he's doing things that are heroic, and he's almost doing them in a way that is begrudgingly, but it's not begrudgingly because he doesn't want to do it. It's begrudgingly because it goes against his instinct. He spent so long as a person who has tried to shrug off any kind of like moral duty, and now he's feeling the pull of that moral duty to do what is right. And it's almost like I don't know, it's like he's out, like kind of like outside of his own skin basically. So you can see that change, that thing that's happening that's going to make him a more heroic character going forward. Again, because of what we've seen in Geiger as well, we're starting to see new things that are being developed and new things that are going to pull all of these people together in the future. This issue's epilogue also does something very similarly, as we've had Albert Einstein, but now we're going to be delivered another quote unquote mythological character that's going to be coming down the pipeline here within the pages of this book. Really exciting stuff here. I think that Brian Hitch's artwork, if he continues to do what he's done for the first 8 issues, this very well could be the very finest piece of artwork that he's put forth here as a series. These 8 issues have been stupendous. He's not taking a panel off, let alone a page. And it just goes to show how great an artist he can be given the right story, the right time, the right amount of time to put it forward, and just, I don't know, the right things to say. It was a really fantastic issue. I loved every single panel of it. This has been a fantastic series through and through. And with our top comic of the week, let's talk Absolute Wonder Woman number 3, written by Kelly Thompson with artwork by Hayden Sherman. This story was all set forth on the premise of Diana having to take out now not the harbinger of the quote-unquote apocalypse here, but the actual thing that is going to destroy the city, the Tetracide. And as the story kind of, rolls out, she is talking to the soldiers and she tells them all about how the Tetracide will deliver the 4 deaths, right? And how that will impact them. So since she talked about the 4 deaths, I want to talk about the 4 brilliances of this book. First and foremost, the brilliance of composition. Hayden's artwork is absolutely stunning, but it's not just stunning, it's the way that they lay out the pages and how inventive they are and the way that they tell the story and how every single page unfolds in a new, really unique way that is not something just as simple as panel 1, panel 2, panel 3. Every page is a unique piece of artwork. We'll talk about the brilliance of dialogue, as everything feels so natural and feels, I don't know, like real people talking. I love how Diana can like switch on a dime here from being bold and daring and like talking to these soldiers in a way that she is the commanding officer. She's the one that's telling them exactly what to do. But when she's talking to Steve, she, I don't know, becomes like a girl in love, right? She becomes very sheepish, and like you see that change artistically and you feel that change with all of the things that she is saying and all of the things that are happening within the book. It's really, really stunning stuff. We'll talk about the brilliance of surprise, as there's been a lot of discussion about Steve Trevor. If he was in hell, how did he get to hell? It feels like there's a very real thing that should be happening to get him there. We find out how he has escaped hell, if you will, and the ramifications behind that. It is, I don't know, it was a jaw-dropping moment, for lack of a better term. And I know that people can say that, willy-nilly. Trust me when I say this wasn't that whatsoever. This really felt like something that was natural. That was something that was in character for how things played out, to be kind of non-spoilery. It was really great to see how that worked out, and it truly did make my jaw drop when I got to the page that revealed what had particularly happened there. And finally, we'll talk about the brilliance of everything coming together, because all of these things make for a good comic. All of these things put together make an absolutely fantastic comic. This is why this is the standalone best part of the Absolute universe so far. Everything's been really good, but this stands out amongst the rest because all those things are working in unison and they're working together brilliantly. This is going to be a fantastic series. This was a fantastic issue. Things are really unfolding to make this a very unique standalone item amongst all of the comics that are on stands right now. If you're a fan of the big two, you should really consider getting this book, because it is really, bar none, probably the best superhero comic I've read in 2024. So that's what I've got for you this week, but I'm more curious. What did you read, and what were your thoughts? Do me a favor, like, share, and subscribe, and be part of the panel. Leave me a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll talk to you next week.